The Commission on Equitable Housing and Development meeting is now commenced. It is October 5th at 4 p.m. This meeting is being held virtually to allow for social distancing and to protect the public health. As we continue our efforts in meeting remotely, we ask all commissioners and guests to mute yourselves until called upon to speak to avoid feedback and background noise. Those who have dialed in using the call-in number, to unmute to speak, dial *6 on your phone. Also, prior to speaking, please announce who you are to identify yourself. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. We ask that you use only the chat function to request to speak or to announce that you're leaving the meeting so we can track quorum. Also, to comply with the state open meeting laws, attendance and votes will be done by way of roll call, not by using the chat function. And with that, we'll do roll call. Maggie Amato-Tejas.
Present.
Wendy Asher.
Present.
Mary Ann Bierling is absent. Mindy Bernstein is absent today. She had a death in the family, or is about to, I think. Mark Clark.
Present.
Hey, Mark. Vicky Casino.
Present.
Sharia Jimenez.
Present.
Lori Mazurbo.
Present.
Tisha Tallman is absent. Jim Toffel, I'm here. Ray Winch.
Present.
Kenny Wong.
Present.
And Jay Young.
Here.
And our ex officio members, Ann Chinenka is not going to make it today. Corin Manning, is Corin with us? Corin is absent also. Betty Villegas. Well, Marcos, you look like you've got the distinguished honor of being our only ex officio member here.
Good evening, everybody.
All right. Okay, so first thing is we've got two sets of meeting minutes to approve. They are on our website. I'm going to give everybody a second to look at them. So for the August and the September meeting minutes. We'll start with August. Are there any changes to the August meeting minutes? We'll see. I thought that the August meeting was one of the best meetings we've had as a commission. I really enjoyed the presentations, especially in the homeless updates, and it was very eye-opening for me personally. Okay, so are there any objections to approving the August meeting minutes as written? Okay, then the August meeting minutes are approved. Let's move on to the September 7th. Are there any changes to the September meeting minutes? Are there any objections to approving the September meeting minutes as written? Okay, the September meeting minutes are approved. Thank you, everybody. Third agenda item is the call to audience. This is a time when any member of the public may address the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development. Due to time constraints, this was going to be held to 15 minutes and individuals are allowed up to 3 minutes each due to open meeting laws. Commission members cannot discuss topics that are not on the agenda. Items brought up by the public may be considered as an agenda item for future meetings.
I don't see any hands raised, Jim, from the public. Oh, here we go. Joe.
Joe?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes,
Mhm.
Joe.
Okay, great. Just real quick, since the member who made this request is not here, I'm gonna remind everybody that a couple months ago in the subcommittee, the Housing First subcommittee, there was a request about the homeless protocol. And it was just to know the breakdown of what homeless camps got put into what tiers of the homeless protocol. The concern being, of course, that um, if every call about a homeless camp it goes from somebody going out there and deciding it's a tier 3 homeless camp and needs to be moved, then the homeless protocol is just facilitating homeless sweeps, which is of course not what we want. So that was asked of Brandy Champion a couple months ago, and Brandy didn't have the answer and is going to get back to us. We haven't seen Brandy since then. It was subsequently asked of Ann Chanica, and we have not seen her come back with an answer for that. So this is just a reminder that that's still an existing request that's out there, and I think it's okay for the commission to want to know that. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for reminding us. Nesto, if you could make a note for next month's agenda to put that on the next month's agenda to make that an item, I'd appreciate it.
Will do, Jim. Thank you. Thank you, Joe.
Anybody else would like to speak?
I see no other hands raised.
All right. So agenda item number 4 is the commission retreat and consultant. Jason, you want to take this?
Absolutely. And if actually, before we hop into that, if it's okay to step back for a second, just a clarification on the question from Joe. So is the question the number of encampments that have been placed in tiers 1, 2, and 3? Is that sort of the request? What is, just want to make sure that our team knows specifically what's being requested.
Yeah, sure. I think the way we discussed it, I wasn't the one to make the initial request, but I've reiterated it. I think the raw numbers would be good, but one of the concerns is that could be misleading if a camp gets escalated from tier 2 to tier 3. Like if all your calls where you find an active homeless camp start as tier 3 or start as tier 2 and then are recategorized at tier 3, theoretically you could get a camp that's placed into both of those, so I suppose I hope that by explaining the background that we want to make sure not everything becomes a tier 3 request kind of elucidates what data we want. Does that make sense, Jason?
It does. So what I'm thinking is maybe the number of encampments that have been a tier 3 encampment sort of at any point relative to the total number of encampments that have been reported. Would that so that it includes that escalated count as well, Joe? I think what I really want to make sure is that the request isn't to know the specific encampments, because that is something that we have not made publicly available.
Correct. No. We don't. I don't think we need that information in a public meeting. I understand if that's internal. I think your suggestion would probably, again, it's not my request, but I think your suggestion probably would fulfill the information that was needed there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks for the allowance to step back there, Jim. So regarding the upcoming retreat for the commission, so a bit of a reminder for folks in the room, there's been the discussion of scheduling a retreat now for several months. There were a few vendors that were identified by commissioners and recommended. Those vendors were not on an existing procurement list within the city. And the way our procurement policies and code are written, we have to work with vendors who are on a procurement list. So we were able to identify with some commissioners that the Southwest Decision Resources, which is an organization that's worked with some other commissions doing similar work, maybe would be acceptable to the commission. for this retreat. And so we have we've expanded the scope of an existing contract with them to include facilitating a retreat for our commission. I do want to also note in there, we are about to open a new procurement that will be an open and continuous procurement that allows us to bring new contractors in over time for this same set of services. So looking at facilitation as well as training and community coaching, some other activities. And so there'll be an opportunity to bring some of those vendors who folks have identified into the city's contract list in the pretty near future within the next few months. So we do want to make those opportunities and bring opportunity for those vendors in. But for this retreat, we do have to work with an existing contracted vendor. So as I mentioned, plan there is to work with Southwest Decision Resources. A couple of questions for the commission. We want to be thinking about the timing of the retreat. So that's kind of a key question for discussion today is when you want to hold a retreat, thinking about spending a day together in person, when that times out to be the best, both for folks' schedules, but also thinking about the kind of timeline for preparatory work. We want the facilitator to be able to meet with each of the subcommittees, get to understand kind of your goals, experience on the commission, do some of that grounding work before going into the retreat. So we want to be thinking about a timeline that allows for that as well. So that's kind of the key question I have for the group is around timing.
So we've had several conversations with the facilitators about that. Jay, Ray, and I were on a call with them this last week. And the thought from the three of us was we should do it on a Saturday afternoon. So it doesn't conflict with the work week because we all have differing schedules. And so we can do it during a weekday if that is the desire of the commission, but that's what our initial thoughts were. And so the three dates that initially were thrown out would be the January 27th, February 3rd, or February 10th. Those are all Saturdays, and it would be like a noon till 5. It'd probably a 5-hour retreat, right?
I was in that meeting. I actually don't recall that at all. What I had suggested was that we asked for their availability for a few dates that were different days of the week. To see if like a weekday afternoon or a Saturday was better. So just wanted to make sure that that wasn't a representation of everyone in that meeting.
Maybe I'm getting confused. It may have been a previous discussion I had with those guys. But I'm open to either. Hey, Neto, can you call Marianne Dearling? She's calling me trying to get into this meeting right now. I'm not
Okay.
sure she's having a problem.
All right. Thank you.
Kenny?
Hi, thanks. I was just hoping if there's any way that the timeline could happen sooner. I think at the last meeting, I'm wondering if early November or sometime in November might work, just so we can have some grounding, have some direction, even before getting into the holidays.
So the thought from the facilitators were that they were going to meet with each of the subcommittees. Actually, they were hoping to be on this call, but they can't be on it till towards the end of the meeting. But their hope was that they were going to meet with each of the subcommittees this next month. Then they'd be in the full commission meeting for November and December, basically setting up a January. So they wanted to basically try to lay the groundworks. So they're not going into a retreat blind, you could say. I think that's what they were thinking. And I think the other problem that the concern that we had is December is a really difficult month. I think it'd be really a huge challenge to get it done by November, and then December is we're getting into the holidays. So the thought was to try to do it at the beginning of the year. Vicki?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, for me, weekends are really difficult. I'm typically doing my parent caregiving shift and out of town. I mean, I think it's going to be difficult to get everybody. You should go with the majority, but I definitely prefer weekdays.
I'm gonna put in the chat the dates that the facilitators threw out as what they thought were possibilities. So on the Saturdays, it was the 27th, the 3rd, and the 10th. On the weekdays, it's the 23rd, the 29th, the 30th, 31st, February 5th, and 8th. They were thinking 1 to 5.
So I'm wondering, Jim, if maybe it would be worth doing kind of an informal by like hand raise poll, maybe of the commissioners about a preference between weekend and weekdays to get a little sense of if there's consensus around one or the other.
So, okay, I guess let me just do a roll call, I guess, and ask if there's a preference of weekends versus weekdays and see what everybody says. So Maggie,
Weekdays, but I'm open to weekends.
okay, Wendy,
Weekends better.
weekend is better. Okay. Mindy is not here. Mark,
Weekdays.
there's Vicky.
As we're doing this roll call, I'm wondering if people have a distinguish too between morning and evening too, to note that if you'd like when you're sharing.
Okay,
Weekdays, I don't care what time, although I'm better in the morning, but weekdays are better.
and Mark, you said weekdays as well.
Yeah, and I could go either way. In general, depending upon the day.
Sharia,
I guess I'm flexible too. Yeah.
Lori,
Weekdays, doesn't matter morning or afternoon.
Ray,
Weekdays and two can be flexible on the time.
all right, Kenny,
Pretty flexible, with a preference for sooner than later. And, you know, doodle or something, if they're able to share that, that would be an easy way to collect.
okay, Jay,
I definitely prefer weekdays. Afternoon would be preferable, but mornings are fine on the weekdays. And if we absolutely have to do it on the weekend, I could do it, but it's definitely not my preference.
okay. So that's good. It sounds like we've got in general whatever, eight people who've responded. I guess Marcos, I didn't call on you. Do you have a preference?
Weekdays,
Okay.
yes.
And I'm fine with either. So I guess let me ask the next kind of question. Is there a day of the week that is in general better for people? I mean, for me, I tend to travel through the middle of the week. So Mondays and Fridays are probably best for my schedule, but Maggie, do you have a preference?
Yeah, I think also Wednesdays and Thursdays I have recurring meetings, and so Mondays and Tuesdays and Fridays. Yeah.
Wendy?
It really depends on what week it is.
Mindy's not here. Mark, do you have a preference on the day?
Yeah, my schedules are really pretty crazy, but Mondays often are good, and some Fridays, especially if they're not the ones the county housing commission is meeting on.
Vicky?
No, with enough notice, I should be able to make it work.
Okay, Shay,
Yeah, same. I'm pretty flexible. Just, yeah, pick a day and I'll try to make it work.
Lori,
I will make work whatever day we pick.
Ray,
Yeah, I think the same. I should be able to make any day that we pick with this amount of notice.
Kenny, do you have a preference on days of the week? Did we lose Kenny? Looks like we lost him. Jay,
It doesn't really matter. If the sooner we can schedule, the easier it is to make anything work. So.
all right, so
Jim, it sounds like from the couple of folks who did identify specific days of the week that are better than others for them, most of the folks, of course, kind of were on a no preference, but the two folks who identified days both identified Friday. That was kind of the one shared day.
yeah, the problem is when I look at the days that were presented by the facilitators, there's not a Friday on there. So they said the 23rd, the 29th, the 30th. So the 23rd is a Tuesday, 29th is a Monday, 30th, 31st are Tuesday, Wednesday, February 5th is a Monday, February 8th of Thursday. So I guess the 29th and the 5th are both on Monday. So we could propose doing it one of those 2 days. And I was thinking from like, we'd serve lunch, start at noon and go to about 5 p.m. was what I was thinking. Vicky, did you have your hand up?
I did, thanks, but I lowered it. So it sounds like you're saying afternoon. That's fine.
Okay. All right. I am going to respond to the facilitators then and propose one of those 2 days. Now we do have a commission meeting on February 1st. So if we do it on the 29th, we'll have the retreat on the 29th, and then 3 days later, we would do a commission meeting. Right?
I heard some desire to do it a little bit earlier too, and this might be all the days that they're available, but wonder in that response to if we could ask if they have Mondays or Fridays earlier in
Yep.
the month.
I can do that.
Thank you.
Okay.
And Jim, just so you know, so it doesn't sound like the 30th is where the group is headed, but to let you know, the 30th, the HCD leadership would not be able to do.
Okay. All right. So I would anticipate that the facilitators will be at each of the subcommittee meetings this next month, probably the next 2. And I guess what I would like each person to be thinking about is, it's one of the things I've learned, and I was talking with Jay about this a little bit earlier, is this group can be a challenging group. And it's hard to get consensus. It takes time. And then it's really hard to actually enact change at the city. As we've learned, we've made a lot of recommendations, and I think the city has kind of accepted them, but then they've been, it's been slow going. And so it does take a little bit of patience on our side, but as you guys are thinking about goals for the commission, I think it's important about starting with, and each of us has to be a little bit selfish here. What are things that we think the city should be doing differently that can have a positive impact? And then what is the process to get them on board? And, how do we establish goals to focus on the process to meet whatever end results that we feel like we should be trying to meet? And it's a challenging subject. We are still trying to set up a meeting with the mayor's office to get some input. I think one of the things that would be really good going forward is if we had more participation from mayor and council on these commission meetings. So we could hear directly from them on the things that are important to them, and if there's things that we could help them with as well. So there's a couple of thoughts I have. I don't know if anybody else has thoughts they'd like to share. So I think Mary Ann's on the phone. That's what I just got a text message from her.
She is on the phone, and I'm trying to figure out a way how to get her voice onto the meeting. Trying to find out a way for her to access her voice.
So Jason, what else do we need to talk about with this topic?
I believe that was the key item for the moment. I know through those subcommittee meetings, the facilitator will want the facilitators will want to be hearing about kind of what each subcommittee's goal is for the retreat, what folks are hoping to see out of it. So I would think coming to those meetings with kind of prepared and having thought about that will be really valuable. And we certainly can spend a little time if folks want to share their goals on that now, Jim, but I think that it's probably a better setting to do that in maybe a smaller group in those subcommittees, and it's able to be communicated directly to the facilitators rather than kind of relayed through us.
Okay. The facilitators' names are Colleen Whitaker and Tani Robertson. And what I'd like to do, if everybody's okay with it, is if they do jump on this meeting before we finish up, we might come back to this agenda item and then just let them introduce themselves and kind of talk about what they see as a process moving forward. Would that be okay for everybody?
Yes.
All right. So anybody else want to have anything to talk about with this agenda item before we move on to the number 5, affordable housing goal? Okay. Neto, can you get it so I can share my screen?
Will do. Yeah, your co-host.
You guys all see this? Can't see
Yes.
me. Okay. Okay, so we talked about this last month. This is the affordable housing goal. We got some feedback from the full commission last month. We kicked it back down to the affordable housing subcommittee, beat it up a little bit more, and I've got some thoughts. So I'm going to just recap what this says one more time and what the affordable housing subcommittee would like to propose that we recommend on our affordable housing goals. So the first part with the graphs, this is from the National Low Income Housing Coalition. So it says right now the state of Arizona has a shortage of about 136,000 affordable housing units for extremely low renters. When we look at the city of Tucson, we currently have a deficit of 26,085 apartments for extremely low income housing individuals. These are individuals who are housing cost burdened. When you look at the individuals at the 50% AMI and below, that shortfall grows to 29,703. Our current affordable housing supply within the city is at 10,920. So that includes 1,489 units, which are owned by the city of Tucson. We have 4,996 Section 8 rental units, 94 units that are home ownership, and then 4,341 other, which includes LIHTC, HUD 202s, and those types of things. So the total is 10,920. Of those, in the next 5 years, there are 1,882 units that are at risk of falling out of affordability, meaning that their compliance period will end in the next 5 years. And then we have 1,192 units currently in the development pipeline that are under construction that are not yet occupiable. So we think by the year 2025, assuming that we don't lose any units and all of these units in the development pipeline are finished, there should be about 12,000 within the city of Tucson limits. So as we look forward, understanding that it's a 2 to 3 year development cycle on new projects, what we talked about previously was assuming we could get 3 9% tax credit awards per year with an average unit size of 75 units, 2 4% bond deals per year with an average size of 200 units, 50 home ownership units, and then 80 other. So all the other programs for a total of 775 per year. So if you do the math, starting with, so in order for these units to count, they need to have funding commitments by 2028, which is 5 years out. So if we take our current supply plus the ones that are under development, assuming that 250 will fall out of affordability, and then adding 775 units per year over 5 years, that gets us to 15,637 apartments. And this is a stretch goal, I believe, especially given what's happening right now with the economy and interest rates and costs. What I'm seeing right now is it's very, very, very difficult to get projects to pencil out. So I do believe this is a stretch goal. So what I'd like to propose is something that's really simple that we can remember, people in the city council can remember, people within HCD can remember, which is a goal of 15,000 units in the city by 2030. It's a nice clean number. It's something that I think is obtainable. It's about a 40% increase of what we have above what we have right now, roughly. So it's a lot of new units, and it's going to take a lot of focus. But I think that's what we would like to propose. So I'd like to open it up to comments or questions.
Can I say something? I can't see anything, so.
Yes, go ahead, Marion.
Okay. I think I'm fine with it moving forward like that. I also want to suggest that we do put a focus on not just home ownership, but non-tax credit projects that can be built less expensive and quicker to help meet this need as well. I think that does need to be a focus, and I think part of the conversation then with the mayor and city council is that, you know, they pass that bond funding, or they set up that, you know, our suggestion of the fund to be able to assist with this. Does that make sense?
Yep. Anybody else have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I have a comment, Jim.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things, so I really like the idea of having a clear goal, like you have laid out on the Word document. You know, gives us as a community something to reach for, to strive for. So I think all of that is good. I guess what my question is how does that relate to the actual need, right? I mean, if we achieve this goal, I think there's a difference between, hey, we've got a goal, we want to try and build more affordable housing than we're planning on building now. However, there's still this other, lots more if we were actually going to address the issue holistically, that, we would actually need to build, X number more. So I guess I don't know where I'm going with this exactly, but just thinking about, I don't want people to think that, if we hit this great goal, that all of a sudden there's going to be enough affordable housing. So, I don't know if that has anything to do with the goal or not, but I just wanted something that was kind of rattling around in my head, wanted to throw it out there.
So I could take a crack at answering that question. So we know that there's a shortfall currently of 29,703 units. We're talking about adding close to 5,000. Let's just say if you include the ones under development. So 5,000 divided by 29,703. So it's about 16% of the current need. Now that need's obviously going to change.
Yeah, I think it's important to, at least for us, to keep that in mind. Kind of as I really appreciated Jason's presentation about the situation with homelessness, and even if it's a rough figure, putting out there that this is how much it would cost to end homelessness in Tucson, and clearly that funding doesn't exist. I just think it's important for us to keep in mind the scope of what the actual scope of the problem is. So it's doesn't really have necessarily anything to do with the goal, which I think is great, but there's still a long way to go if we were truly going to address the affordable housing issue. So
any other comments?
I just saw a question in the chat asking about which bond, and if you could share your screen. I think the bond doesn't exist yet, to answer the question. We would be asking and using, this data to help, put some political pressure to get the funding, right? To do this, to help make this 15,000 goal possible.
Now, this document is on the website, by the way, if anybody wants to look at it or download it.
My comment, this is Maggie, what with the on the first page of this report where it says 94 homeownership units, that is just PCCLT. So I'd like some more accurate information. I know that this is something we've requested. I really would love to know, SALT and Habitat, and what is it that they have. And as far as the recommendation for the 15,000 units, I would like to see it broken down as to what projects, so that there's a clear idea of this is the goal for how many more homeownership units. This is how many we want for LIHTC and whatever else, however else that wants to be divided. But I think that is important versus just throwing out a 15,000 unit number.
So you mean based something like this, but in totality?
Well, I don't. So when you say, down below, lower, when you're saying now nice round number of 15,000 is the goal. I like that idea. It's easy to remember. I totally agree. But I also think that it can be broken down between home ownership and non-home ownership or rental, right? Because those are the two, I don't think we have transitional housing in here. I don't know. We're talking about permanent affordable units, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Permanent housing. So
here's what I was thinking we would do is, and I'm totally good doing that, Maggie, is if we can vote today on making the recommendation of 15,000 units by 2030. I will work on putting together a formal letter to go to mayor and council, and we can include that data in the letter of what we think, by program, the numbers are going to be. I do need help though, getting that home ownership information pulled together. I don't know where to go to get that.
Yeah, I think that's, the city needs to kind of really make this a priority, because I think we've had numerous meetings already where it's the same number and it's not changing. And I know that at one point I provided Sarah Megason with our numbers and even our proposed projects coming up. And also, and I don't know if anyone has reached out to SALT or even Habitat, which, their units.
Jason, Ray, I'll get to you 1 second. Jason, do you have an answer for that question?
Yeah, so I had noted the question as Maggie brought it up and kind of highlighted that gap in data. So city staff can absolutely reach out to both SALT and Habitat to try to gather those numbers. There's also, the city is also doing some work to convert some units to permanently affordable homeownership, both through asset repositioning as well as through some new development. So we can factor in some of those numbers as well.
Right.
I'm wondering, Jim, I want to make sure that I'm fully understanding what the proposal is. Could you walk through one more time what it is that we'd be asking for in the bond? Could you do one more walkthrough of how much we would be asking? Is that 225 units or is that 225,000?
These are individual units. So this is not really related to the bond initiative. I think this can be used as a tactic to help push the approval of a bond initiative. Say, hey, if we're going to hit this goal, we need more funding, and the best way to get more funding would be to do a bond initiative. So this in and of itself is not really related to the bond. I think it's a mechanism to say, well, if we really want to hit the 15,000, we need more funding and we need more money, and the bond is the best way to get that. So,
and maybe just some clarity on what you're proposing would qualify in the bond. Is this mostly, and we talked before in the subcommittee about each unit costing $300,000, of what exactly would be the proposal for what would be funded with the bond.
TBD. There needs to be a panel of people put together to evaluate how the bond would be set up, what type of bond it would be, how the money would be allocated. That's a very difficult question, and it's going to take some work to get through. I think it's probably 1 to 2 years of effort before we can even get it on the initiative on the ballot, excuse me.
Jim, I'm wondering though if it would be helpful to have some sort of, it's kind of built in your table here, but some rough sense of where this money is coming from. Is that too much to ask? But we kind of have a sense, right? We have the programs, LIHTC, CDBG, or is that information we already have?
Well, so that's kind of what we said down here at the bottom.
Okay.
Is we know that the average development cost of a new unit is about $360,000 to $380,000 per unit when working with tax credits and bonds. Now, this is a different bond than the City of Tucson bond. This is a 4% tax credit. So the intent here was 9% and 4% tax credits. So based on the number of new units times $370,000, that's almost $1.4 billion, which will require the City of Tucson to put between 15 to $50 million into the funding. Now, this again is a really loosey-goosey number. Obviously, the more they can put in, the more likely we are going to have to get projects here. But Tucson is a difficult place to work. I just had this conversation with a national developer today who was trying to put together a 4% tax credit project in the state. And I said, why don't you look at Tucson? And he said, Tucson doesn't work because the incomes are so low. So we have to work a little bit harder here to get projects out of the ground than they do in Phoenix and other parts of the state. So just kind of following this train of thought through, if we think that the city is going to put in between 15 to 50 million, and the city of Tucson is planning to put $2 million per year into a housing trust fund, that would provide 10 million. So there has to be something in addition to that, was all I was saying here. And the housing bond measure is one option to fill that gap. There are other options, but this is one option that has been discussed and was preliminarily approved by mayor and council. Does that answer your question, Gray?
It does some. I would like, before we sent a letter, to like have a deep understanding and consensus of what we're really asking for. And some is like, it's okay for those units, then is like how much is actually charged in rent. I know one question I've heard come up in this group before is like affordable to whom, and like how expensive will these rentals be, and for how long will they be at a subsidized rate. And then also heard a mention of like things beyond tax credit projects too, of like buying a mobile home park and having smaller units and like other ways that we're not only looking to fund this one particular way of doing development. I would like to be exploring those in a proposal for a housing bond. I'm like fully behind us coming out with a letter saying that we would like to support a housing bond, but I want more clarity on what that kind of funding would be used for.
Can I interject something?
Sure, Marion, go ahead. There's two people with their hands raised.
Oh, I can wait.
Okay, I'm gonna call on Jay and then Mark, and then I'll go to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that, Ray, you raise a good point, and I guess kind of what came to my mind was what Jim is presenting, at least the way that I see it, is basically telling the city that it needs to do more and come up with more money. And, figuring that out in detail for something like this seems like a challenging thing to do and maybe not the place to do it. But I think, Ray, your point though is like, how then do we as a commission dig into more of the nitty-gritty about what else can be done to do more to get more affordable housing? So, I mean, maybe they do go together and I'm just not kind of seeing it, but it also kind of reminds me, Ray, of like some of the, kind of equity pieces that we've been talking about, and, getting into the details of how, we make housing more equitable. Like, how do we go about doing that? Is it our job as the commission, or is it like, we give a broader kind of recommendation or mandate or whatever you want to call it, and then, folks from the city kind of, mull it over and figure out stuff and then come back to us. So again, I'm kind of thinking out loud here, and I appreciate what you were raising, Ray, about the kind of detail. So anyway, that's just kind of the things that came to my mind. I don't know where to go with that exactly.
Mark?
So Shay and Marcos may have a little bit of a different take on this. I'm not sure, but this is the county's regional affordable housing commission has been having a pretty similar discussion, coming at it with different funding sources because the county has different funding possibilities than the city does. But it's interesting, both commissions struggling with, we know there's a big problem and we know we need more money, and how do we find that? And part of the challenge really has been how do you do that, and how do you make recommendations? And so I mean, it's definitely a huge issue, and looking for significant. I mean, Jim, as you identified, the issue is money, but it's also developers, builders, and operators who can actually make stuff work is a challenge as well. I think it also points to one of the slight challenges with having the two commissions operating separately, which I understand that, and that's probably a whole different issue, which is probably not agendized, so I'll shut up about that. But it's just interesting.
Marianne?
I don't know who spoke before Mark, I'm sorry.
That was Jay.
But Jay, thank you. I do think we're drilling down with some of these questions into the nitty gritty that really does require, you know, some expertise and city management and legal people, you know, involved in putting together an actual bond ask. This, I believe, is just this general start the conversation going, you know, with the council and moving start pushing in the right direction, and giving some fodder to the request for the bond, and also, you know, to set up the trust fund that we've talked about as well. I don't think this is the moment or the method to start talking about how rents may or may not change, or the types of money that might be available 2 years from now. I think that's too off in the future, and it's going to bog us down from moving ahead and keeping our ball rolling with City Council.
Jay?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think, you know, I also, you know, really appreciate, you know, and also similarly would love to dive into what types of projects are they going to be and who's going to be funded, but I feel like that's a little bit too in the weeds at this point. The really just setting the housing unit goal, I think, is an important step that a lot of other you know, we're seeing a lot of other communities use this as a tool to, you know, then ask for real dollars. So I think we just need to approve. I think we vetted this number a lot in the we've spent almost 3 months vetting this number. I'm ready to move forward on this, and you know, and I think that getting into the specifics of what a bond will be, what will it look like, and what types of projects it will be funded is something that can be taken on in subcommittee or even potentially addressed at our retreat. But at this point in time, I think I would, you know, I would like to move forward. I feel comfortable with this number and feel like we've done a lot of work to arrive here.
Marcos?
Yeah, I agree that you know, moving ahead with a goal is to come first, and then, you know, how that reaching that goal is going to be funded or achieved, I think would be the next step. But I think it's important to set a goal as a starting point to work towards. And then, yeah, I think, you know, the rest as far as funding is going to involve, you know, future discussions, strategy sessions, maybe to, you know, to seek out the best places to fund. And I think, you know, the city's going to have to look to a comprehensive approach and identify several sources to meet that goal, and figure out the best way to leverage other resources with the funding that the city does have right now. And just a couple of quick points to point out that the county learned in working with bonds for affordable housing. One of the first ones was that bond funds really can't be used to fund a housing trust fund because of the issues with negative arbitrage, and bond funds aren't meant to be loaned back out. So that's an issue. So I think the city's going to have to look for other ways to fund the housing trust fund. But a bond issue, I think, could go along with it and complement it. But of course, it's very complicated, and you can't forget about the voters. And at some point, you're going to have to embark on a media campaign to convince the voters that this is the right thing to do. But I think that's, like I said, a whole nother issue and numerous strategy sessions ahead. And I think the focus should be on setting the goal. And then, as something to rally around and work towards.
So one thing I just wanted to take a quick step back. This is the first set of goals. Is our mission and goals for HCD. And so from the Affordable Housing Subcommittee, the first goal was to provide a set of recommendations to Mayor and Council on activity levers and tools that the city can leverage to increase the momentum around affordable housing. And I think we've done a pretty good job with that. Identify new funding opportunities for affordable housing. So I think this is where the bond measure falls in, is under this second item. And then the third item is to deliver a sufficient number, and this is the key here, TBD, of new affordable housing units within the city of Tucson. And, the question is, what is this TBD? What is that number? How do we define that number? And then once we've defined that number, try to use it as a tool to push things forward, as it was the thought. So
Agreed.
I guess what I would like to do, what I'd like to ask is this somebody who's willing to make a proposal or a motion to accept the subcommittee's recommendation of a City of Tucson goal of 15,000 apartments by the year 2030?
I'll make that recommendation.
Recommendation made by Marianne. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Shay. So is there any further discussion before we put it to vote?
Yes, I would like to make sure that it doesn't say apartments, but affordable housing units.
Did I say apartments? I apologize if I said that.
Yes.
Okay, so the motion is to set a goal within the city of Tucson of 15,000 affordable housing units by the year 2030. Any other comments? Okay, I'm going to call the question. Maggie?
Yay.
Wendy?
Yay.
Marianne?
Yay.
Wendy's not here. Mark?
Aye.
Vicky?
Aye.
Shay?
Aye.
Lori?
Yes.
Ray?
I'm gonna abstain.
Okay. Kenny?
Yes.
And Jay?
Aye.
Okay, thank you guys. The ayes have it. So next steps will be to put together a formal letter, which we will work on through the subcommittee and come back to this group next meeting. Jason, if you could help us with figuring out how many affordable for sale units we have. We'll update those numbers and try to provide a little bit more detail in the letter, and I'll be presenting that at our next meeting. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate the work.
Okay, our next agenda item is subcommittee updates, and Housing First. Tisha is out. Is there anybody who can give an update on Housing First?
Jim, I was at the meeting. It was a very brief meeting. There was a discussion about non-city of Tucson, I think, as I recall. Boy, it was like last week. It's so long ago. Non-city of Tucson Housing First initiatives, and Mindy, who was chairing the meeting, actually requested that we have a staff report come back about that. I think that's what happened.
Thank you for stepping in, Mark. Is there any questions for Mark and the subcommittee members? Okay, housing desegregation, Jay.
We did not meet.
Affordable housing is me. Shay, were you at the meeting? I don't remember. I think you were.
Which one? The last?
Yeah, the last one. Basically, in the last affordable housing subcommittee, we spent almost the entire time talking about the goal, which we just reviewed. We spent probably an hour and a half talking about it. So, any questions for us? Okay, HCD update, Jason.
Certainly. So a few things we wanted to update you on. One, of course, as you all know, the city received a Choice Neighborhoods implementation grant. As part of that grant, we're now beginning, or at the last mayor and council meeting, grant acceptance was approved. And so we're beginning implementation on that grant. And one of the most noteworthy immediate items will be we'll be hiring about 19 new staff positions over the next 6 months. And a little over half of those specifically to support resident services in the Tucson house. So something we're really excited about in terms of adding that value to the Tucson house residents through both through this transition period and kind of the challenges associated with redeveloping an occupied tower, but then also sort of long-term helping to meet folks' needs in that way. I also wanted to give a bit of a follow-up to the meeting that's been referenced a few times now today, back in August, that presentation regarding kind of the state of homelessness in the city. And so at that time, we had shared both the point-in-time count and data report, as well as the homeless needs assessment that had just been completed at that time by the university. And it had told you that a report on the costs of ending homelessness in Tucson would be forthcoming. That report has since been released. I dropped the link to it in the chat a little bit earlier in the meeting when Jay mentioned it at first. And so I believe, it's still second to last item in the chat. So if you haven't taken a look at that, I encourage you to. And before I move on from that item, I know Austin Puka is here with us, who oversees the continuum of care, the Tucson Community Collaboration to End Homelessness. So I don't know, Austin, if there's anything you'd like to add to that. Oh, we can't hear you.
Is that all right now? All right.
Yes.
I don't have anything to add to what you stated. The continuum of care submitted the NOFO last week on the 29th for the same 16 renewal projects. There were no bonus projects this round. So it's a little under $12 million worth of funding applied for.
Thanks so much. Then also wanted to follow up. So at the at the last meeting, Anne had provided a presentation. Sorry, Jim.
Oh, I was going to ask you about going back to Tucson House. And that, what do you think the timing is on the start of that rehab? Do you think it's still a year out or more?
I am going to defer to Allison Miller, who's here on the call. And can probably speak best to that as the champion of all things choice neighborhoods.
So we're envisioning Tucson House as the first phase of our housing plan for the choice grant. And so it's a 15-month deadline before we close, and then about an 18-month deadline before construction starts. And that starts from the date that we got our grant. So still looking at about kind of early 2025, most likely for the beginning of construction.
Then are there going to be a bunch of people that have to move out of Tucson House during construction, or do you think you'll be able to kind of shuffle everybody around through the complex while it's going on?
So Gorman is our co-developer for this project, and they've worked on several other tower rehab projects. And what they've found success with is doing several floors at a time. So sort of a phased approach that helps to minimize relocation out of the building. So shuffle people around within the building. Again, it's all based on resident preferences. So, right, residents who want to stay, we can work with them to shuffle them within the building, as well as provide relocation options as people choose who do want to move out of the building.
Thanks, Allison. So at the last meeting, Anne had provided a presentation, that kind of preparatory presentation about asset repositioning, although we were not saying asset repositioning as often, and provided that presentation to the group and got feedback from you all to help inform the presentation to Mayor and Council. So that presentation did go to Mayor and Council last month, and so Mayor and Council has affirmatively supported the asset repositioning concept and approach. The way that works at each stage of development, every time we're looking at changing a specific property, that will have to go back to Mayor and Council for individual approval. So we didn't ask for approval of the plan as much as approval and endorsement of the approach and to move forward. And so I know Anne, although she wasn't able to be here today, really wanted to express gratitude to the commission for the feedback that you all provided in that last session. That really helped her to sort of redesign some aspects of that presentation for Mayor and Council and the public. Through that as well, you may remember that one piece was that we had discussed creating a task force to really look at the individual housing units. So we have many individual single-family housing units that are currently in the public housing stock. And we're looking at which of those units should remain in the public housing stock as rental inventory or move to affordable rentals, and how many of those units maybe would be better to rehabilitate and sell as permanent affordable housing. And so our plan was to create a task force to really help inform how we make that decision, like what what criteria we use to identify properties for each of those options. And so Mayor and Council's recommendation back has been that be a working group of the commission. So not asking that to be fully commission members, but to have some commission membership as well as some outside membership on that. But for that working group to really kind of function under the auspices of the commission. And Anne can certainly share more about that with you when she gets back, when she returns to town at the next meeting or so. But wanted to just sort of let you know that and see if there were any concerns from the group on that kind of recommendation back from Mayor and Council.
Thank you, Jason. Any questions for Jason?
And then there's one last item, Jim, which is an update on the Knights Inn. So as you know, we HCD purchased the Knights Inn property at 22nd Street, 29th Street, and Craycroft a few months ago for use as non-congregate shelter. And so we've entered into an operating agreement with Pima County. And so Pima County is beginning to provide shelter services on site at that property through their emergency eviction legal services program. So a really rich partnership between the city and the county that kind of leverages the expertise of both for the city in terms of property management and ownership, the county being able to relocate their program from a hotel property that is much more costly to working in partnership with the city to provide those services. And so keys were turned over earlier this week. Marcos may be able to share a little more, but I know they are rapidly preparing to move folks into that property. So deploying new assets.
Right.
I have a question, Jason. I know at Mayor and Council, there was a topic recently about the sober living houses and the fraudulent sober living houses. And that's currently an issue now with one of the Ocotillo house, the fraudulent sober living home that many people are now losing their housing. I'm wondering if HCD is having a conversation about how that issue is being addressed.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. That's a really important topic. So HCD has been involved in the relocation strategy for folks who are residing in the Ocotillo apartments, particularly through our Housing First division. So Brandy Champion has been working really closely with Madi Vasquez, and Madi is an interagency resource coordinator to addressing issues related to unsheltered homelessness in particular, but also other sort of housing related crises. And so she co-reports to the city and the county and really serves as a liaison to try to bridge our efforts. And so Madi has been the lead on that response, but the Housing First team has been an active part of it. I think it's something during Mayor and Council, there was a pretty lengthy presentation earlier this week from Madi about that. And I think we could, if the commission would like to understand more of what's happening there and to get a bit of an update, that's probably something we could ask Madi or Brandy to bring to the next commission meeting.
I guess maybe as a follow-up on that, I'm wondering about a little bit more upstream there, because there's the one thing which is the responding about going in and talking about resources, which I imagine you might agree with that, people are not, the resources are not there, right? Enough resources are not there. And that's not HCD's fault, right? And HCD is not a fault for the fraudulent sober living homes. I'm wondering what HCD is there any conversation with Access of saying actually you approved these fraudulent sober living homes. You can't just evict people. What are the upstream factors of holding those accountable to ensure that people aren't losing their homes and then having to just be told of the very few resources that there are. I appreciate the efforts of HCD. And again, there's no culpability there of not having the resources that people actually need. Is what if HCD has any kind of plan for ensuring that the crackdown on fraudulent sober living homes doesn't actually involve displacing more people?
Yeah, that is a really great question. Unfortunately, I don't have an answer to that. I've not been involved in that activity. But I am absolutely happy if the commission would like to have Madi or Brandy or Anne kind of speak to this more in depth next meeting. Very happy to request that from them.
Or perhaps even someone from Access or someone a little bit more upstream of where the problem is coming from as well.
Great. Wendy?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I'd just like to underscore Ray raised. It's a really horrible situation where people who were vulnerable were exploited even further by some really unscrupulous folks. And it appears that these folks were funded, excuse me, by Access with very little oversight and have all sort of disappeared into the woods because they were relatively illegitimate operations to start with. But I wanted to point out to people, excuse me a second. that there was a very in-depth article in the Star today that explained the discussions that happened at the recent meeting at Mayor and Council. So pretty much outlines what the city's response was. And I think the additional damning piece is that the property at Ocotillo Apartments and Hotel was condemned by code enforcement because of violations and missing fire extinguishers, et cetera. And it's not clear that the owner of the property didn't do that intentionally. So it's a really awful situation with a lot of people being mistreated by a lot of different actors. So I just want to put out that information.
Thank you for that, Wendy.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions for the HCD update? Okay, with that then, I guess we're going to be bringing the meeting to close a little bit early today. Our next commission meetings are November 2nd and then December 7th. The Affordable Housing Subcommittee is going to meet October 18th. Housing Desegregation is October 26th. And Housing First is October 31st. As we said, the facilitators are going to be attending each of the subcommittee meetings, so I'd encourage you guys to attend those and get that process started. Any other agenda items that we want to have on our next meeting? So Ray, if you want to have that as an agenda item, can you send us an email with what you're thinking?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay, thank you. Any other agenda items commissioners would like to see?
I do. I have one.
Go ahead, Marianne.
As part of the HCD update, I'd like to hear what the city is going to be doing with its permanent housing vouchers, so that we avoid what just happened with the voucher applications that were put in many months prior to finding out that the city ran out of vouchers. And so a few, at least in our organization, several people went back to homelessness. So I'm wondering if the city has discussed this thoroughly and has a plan in place so that it doesn't happen again. I'd like to hear something about that. And Jason, please feel free to call me. I've got the emails and things that went back and forth with the city, and I've also been talking to the county about it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Marianne. I can request that Ann or Terry provide an update on that at the next meeting.
Okay.
I would love to hear a comprehensive presentation that outlines clearly what the city and the county, for that matter, have done related to gentrification. It's been something that we as a commission are supposed to be dealing with and have done very little about. And it would be great to know, if there are things that have been done, like, tax breaks for longtime residents of gentrifying areas, or, there are many things that other places have done. So I'm just wondering, there's been a lot of talk about gentrification in Tucson, but I'm just curious as to what, if any, actual policy interventions have been made, or what other policies have been put in place, if anything, that actually addresses gentrification. So is that relatively clear?
Yep.
Yes.
So the two other items that we're talking about adding are the permanent voucher program shortfall and an update on what the city's doing regarding gentrification.
And not just what it is doing, but over the past 10 years, let's say, what policies have been put in place that are addressing gentrification in some way. So more so, Jim, I think a look back as opposed to, a look forward. I mean, if there are things that are in the works now, it'd be great to know about that as well. But, looking back, say 10 years.
Okay. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We are adjourned. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.